This is Harriet Jones. You are listening to Unlimited Hyperbole with Joe Martin.
If you listen to some people in the movie industry, they'll tell you that fear is by far the easiest emotion to elicit. All you need to do is have a long pause and a sudden shock. And while that's a tactic some developers like to use a lot too, what many people single out as the scariest games are those which provoke a very different type of fear, one drawn from the world ambience rather than the monsters jumping out of cupboards. And there's one game, one level, which gets singled out more than any other, and that's the Shalebridge Cradle from Thief, Deadly Shadows.
Thief feels a lot like a pulp adventure, as in, Garrett is a character who goes on adventures of different styles.
That's the voice of Kieran Gillen, co-founder of Rock Paper Shotgun and comics writer for series such as Uncanny X-Men and Phonogram.
And this is especially true in the first game, which is kind of some of the stuff they weeded out as they went through. So there was a level which basically felt like Tomb Raider. So it felt like here's an underground place, and here's something to explore. It's about exploration and climbing and all that kind of stuff. And other levels, are much more about the urban environment or the puzzle. It's a caper movie, essentially.
The Cradle, meanwhile, is the haunted house of the story, a former insane asylum and orphanage which was condemned after a fire. Like any real-life derelict, the Shalebridge Cradle has a long and disturbing history, but piecing that together is the aim of the level, and sorting the fact from the fiction isn't easy. Kieran says that to fully decode the history of the Cradle he had to play the level several times, and even then had to have aspects of it pointed out to him by the level designers. While this would normally be a case of diminishing returns, however, the Cradle instead gets more and more gripping with every visit, due largely to the way that clues are delivered out of sequence and often incomplete, funneling attention to individual atrocities and leaving just enough gap for the imagination.
It's a game about closure. The idea that by being presented with a variety of clues, you will fill in the gaps yourself. For me, this is right to the core of what games are really good at, because how we tell stories in games at its best is how we tell stories in real life. It's the slow dawning of something's going on. It's like finding somebody else's underwear in your bedroom at the point you realise someone's been cheating on you. And that's some of the ways we tell our most personal stories in real life. It's the moment of realisation, it's the fact that you are engaged in it. And that's what, one of the interesting things about the Cradle is, it's a particularly complicated story, which has a definite answer that you can definitely put together. But it happens mainly in your head, and even if you haven't got the complete thing, the gaps are scary. I mean, this is Lovecraft. This is the idea of not quite understanding something. And that there's a form of horror there. It's the cosmic horror, the idea that there's some things you will never know, and that's an interesting way of both doing horror, and also, as I said earlier, that's a really good way that video games can tell stories.
The horror that the Cradle conjures stems from more than just the way the story is told, however. It's also to do with the subject matter that's used, and how that differs so greatly from the rest of the game. Deadly Shadows is, for the most part, a very physical feeling and cynically pitched experience, where success over even the most fantastical elements such as zombies is achieved through the exploitation of predictable systems such as light and shadow. The Cradle deliberately breaks that pattern, however, and when the building suddenly comes to life around you, new enemies and game logic are suddenly introduced along with it, leaving you feeling horribly out of your depth in the process.
One of my favourite very minor game design tricks to it is the fact that the patients, I think most people when they played it through thought they were indestructible, because they take 3 flash bombs to kill, and all other undead take 2. So what I did, and what many other people I've talked to did, they threw 2 flash bombs, and oh my god, they're not going down. They can't go down. Then by slightly changing the rules of the simulation in one case, you become like Garrett. It's not like you think, oh, maybe I'll try another flash bomb, it'll work. It's the idea that all your rules of your universe, which you've been learning, are now wrong. And that's, when you don't know the rules, it becomes scary. The fact they've changed the rules slightly, and they do that in quite a few other ways throughout the level, that almost resets the fact that you're kind of back to being a beginner again. You don't know what's true and you don't know what's not true. I mean, if you talk about an actual classic Thief game design, the museum, which is the next level, that's the best level in the game in terms of actually it's a Thief level, and that's really strong. That's a great way to not finish the game, but that's the last classical Thief level in it, and it's the best one. It's full of complexities and options and little stories, and not much fear, but it's robbing a museum, which is a beautiful thing to do. But the fact that the Cradle is something else entirely is what kind of elevates it.
While it's the function of the level in a wider sense which makes it so noteworthy compared to the rest of the game, however, it was in discussing the specific tools which developer Ironstorm used in creating that sense of fear that Kieran came to have his first interaction with Shalebridge.
It was the first game I ever actually reviewed for PC Gamer, Thief. I was incredibly lucky in terms of getting my first, dance. It's kind of like, I felt a bit like Lester Bangs if his first ever album review was the Velvet Underground, Anyway, so I reviewed Thief, and then I ended up meeting, she was assistant producer at the time, I think, Lulu Lemaire, who went over to eventually join Ironstorm. We ended up drinking till like 5 in the morning in a hotel, just because I was going to go home, and then, my god, it's fucking Looking Glass are over. Met her, and this has kind of led me to starting to open more journalistic contacts. And I was working on an article about fear. This is like one of the first sort of pieces of quote-unquote serious criticism I did. And I spoke to a load of developers about how they utilise and how they create the effects. And of course, this is a very standard fucking article now. But Lulu introduced me to Randy.
That's Randy Smith, by the way, who went on to become project lead on Thief Deadly Shadows, and who, along with Jordan Thomas, co-designed the Cradle.
And me and Randy had this like 20,000 word email exchange, like back and forth. And it was all basically just trying to really get how it works. And he ended up basically developing a critical theory as we went through. And he starts getting his theory of boundaries and safeties and questions of how you can change what a boundary of safety and not safety means. And Thief works on the idea that you are abstractly safe in some places, and then you have to leave those safe places, and that is doing something you don't want to do, therefore creates fear. Anyway, fast forward 3 or 4 years or whatever it was, Randy hears that I'm about to review Thief 3, and he says, tell me, when you get to the haunted house level, tell me what you make of it, because pretty much all that comes from the codified theory that I'd forced him to think up. And obviously it's brilliant, it's incredible. I still think it's an incredible piece of design. This is the best thing I've ever done as a journalist in terms of actually useful criticism. Acting as a mirror to a creator in a way that, that actually helps illuminate their own work, and then they go forward. And then I got to write this enormous piece of criticism about the thing which was created in response to the questions. That the dialogue between critic and creator, not just, being bullshit or just saying a game's great or slacking them off, actually being vaguely a useful part of the creative process, no matter how tangentially. Yeah, that felt right. It's one of the highlights of my career, and that's kind of what criticism is quote-unquote for. I'm saying the word quote-unquote a lot, I'm talking figuratively of some of this stuff.
Kieran's access to the Thief 3 team ahead of the game's release meant that you got to see how Randy's ideas were implemented from the earliest possible stages too. He notes that while the Cradle remained fundamentally the same through all the betas he played, other features which may have influenced the scariness of the entire game changed radically.
My one regret was they had a feature in it that was in like the very last beta I was playing, and they took it out for the full game. Basically, it was a kind of System Shock style selectors. So if you remember System Shock, you were able to actually select the level of monsters, the level of violence, and lots of different things like that. You got to basically customise a bit. So you could do stuff, for example, set the AI to full and set the amount of gold you had to get in a level to the lowest. Because in the actual final game, much like the first 2 games, the only way to actually do difficulty was, if you want to play with the best AI, you've got to also play with the completionist approach. And I frankly was never interested in, I thought that, for me, scouring an entire mansion and taking every single piece of gold from it was ludicrous. No, I get what I want to do and get out, that's what the job is. Running away it's one of those weird things about Thief, it's at its scariest when you're worst at it. And the better you get, the more competent and the more sure of what the limitations are. And the run for your life is such a great moment. Some of my favourite memories of Thief, all of the thieves, are based around when I fucked up entirely. And what's through this door? Through the door, and there's a guard, and under the table, and off the wall.
What's most enviable about Kieran's access to the game during production, however, isn't that you got to see how the game evolved over time, but that you also got a heads up from Randy about what is still called in the game files as merely the haunted house. And with that, he did what anyone else would do when they found something really scary. He shared it with his friends.
I knew I got to level, so I waited till nightfall. And I was living with Dan Grillopoulos at the time, and he had being a PC format guy, he had stolen like a projector from the office. And I had, I think Alec was around, and my future wife Chrissy, she was in the room as well. And we played the whole of the Cradle for the first time, basically like a Saturday night horror film. And we all gathered around in the dark, and it was like, paranoia and fear works from playing a game like that. bouncing off each other. When that door just opened. Was that door open then? Or was it just open now when our backs was turned? Yeah, that was a fantastic experience.
Unlimited Hyperbole is produced by Joe Martin and myself, Harriet Jones, with music this week from Dexter Britton. You can follow us online at joemartinwords.com, and you can follow us also on Twitter. For Joe, you can find him at Joe Threepwood, and for myself, you can follow me at HC_Jones. Thank you for listening.